Ever feel like the game you've been playing suddenly turned upside down? One moment, you're the pawn caught in their game, and the next, you're the king, unstoppable, in control with every move, deliberate and powerful. Let that sink in for a second. Chosen ones, because the moment has come, they've hit their dead end. The tables have flipped, and the ones who once held power over you, they're lost, scrambling to catch up, trying to figure out how to play a game they never expected you to win. Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. You've been through the battles, the emotional roller coasters, the manipulations that were once meant to break you. But here you stand, stronger, wiser, and untouchable. They tried to play you. They thought you were still that person who'd react to their chaos, still the one who'd fall for their lies, and still the one who'd keep playing their game. But guess what? You've outgrown it. You've outgrown them, and now they're at a dead end. The smoke and mirrors they once used to control you no longer work. The lies they told, you see right through them. The emotional games, you're no longer interested. You've reached a place where your peace is your power, your silence is your strength, and your presence is a force that can't be ignored. This Chosen Ones is no longer about fighting. It's about rising above the chaos, stepping into your true power, and leaving behind everything that once tried to keep you small. In this video, we're going to dive into why the manipulators, the ones who thrived on your emotional turmoil, have finally hit their limit. They thought they had all the control, but in reality, they never did, because the moment you stopped playing their game, their entire world crumbled. Get ready for 14 savage, soul-cutting truths about why they can't play in your face anymore, and why the very game they thought they mastered just blew up in their hands. You didn't just survive their schemes, you turned the tables and left them with nothing but their empty tricks. So sit tight, because what's coming next will make you realize just how far you've come. And just before we dive in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below to let me know if you're ready to take your power back. This is just the beginning. Chosen Ones. Let's get into it. Section 1. The evolution beyond the game. There was a time when their manipulations worked like clockwork. They knew exactly how to push your buttons, which strings to pull, and when to apply just the right amount of pressure. You were the player, and they were the puppeteers, masterfully controlling every reaction, every emotion, every step you took. But that was then. Now the board has flipped. The players have changed positions, and the game isn't what it used to be. You're no longer the pawn, you're the king. What they didn't anticipate was your growth. They thought they could keep you trapped in that loop forever, stuck in the role they had carved out for you. They thought they knew you, your weaknesses, your vulnerabilities, your responses. They crafted their game around the old version of you, and to them that version was predictable. But then something shifted. You outgrew the game. It didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't a single defining moment. It was a slow, steady process of realization. First, it was the small changes, the times you caught yourself not reacting the way you used to, the times you stopped chasing closure when they pulled away, or when their words no longer stirred the anger they once did. Then it was the bigger shifts, the moments when you realized that the same emotional triggers they used to control you no longer worked. You no longer needed their validation. You no longer needed to explain yourself to them. You stopped needing them altogether. And that's when everything changed. They were so used to you playing your part, responding the way they expected you to, falling into the same patterns of doubt, fear, and confusion. They had the script down to a T. You were their star player, and the game was simple. They pushed your buttons and you reacted almost like clockwork. But that version of you, she's gone. You're not just playing a new game. You've rewritten the rules entirely. They never saw it coming. They never imagined that you would evolve beyond the reach of their control. They thought you'd always be the one scrambling for their approval, always seeking their validation. They believed the mask they wore, the fake love they handed you, disguised as concern, would always be enough to keep you in line. But it's not. You saw through it. You recognized that what they were offering wasn't love. It was manipulation, power, control. And the moment you realized that the game was over, instead of reacting, you started observing. Instead of trying to explain, you started protecting your peace. Instead of fighting to be understood, you simply walked away from the fight altogether. And that's when they lost their power over you. They were left in a silence they couldn't fill. It's almost poetic, isn't it? The very thing they feared the moment you stopped playing by their rules is what broke their grip on you. They thought they were keeping you trapped in their little world, but in reality they were only holding themselves back from seeing the truth. You didn't just catch on to their game, you grew past it. Imagine how unsettling that must have been for them. One day, you're a predictable target, and the next, you're someone they can't even begin to understand. Your peace, your clarity, your unshakable sense of self. These things are what they never counted on. They assumed they could manipulate you forever. But you, chosen one, were never meant to be anyone's pawn. They thought they could control the game, but you changed the rules. And now, as they scramble to figure out how to play this new version of you, you're calmly sitting on the throne, no longer interested in the chaos they tried to create. They don't know how to engage with someone who no longer plays their game. They don't know how to provoke someone who's no longer reactive, no longer vulnerable to their manipulation. You've evolved, and that evolution, it's what has them stuck at a dead end. They've lost their power over you because you no longer need to fight. You no longer need to react. You've outgrown the entire game they thought they could control. And the best part, they can't even begin to comprehend how you did it. How you walked away from their world, how you stopped giving them your energy, how you learned to play in a way that they can't understand. But here you are, chosen one, unbothered, unfazed, no longer playing the game they built around you because you've realized the truth. They were never the players, you always were. They were just too blind to see it. Section 2. Emotional Independence. There was a time when their emotional triggers were like buttons on a remote control. Press the right one, and you'd react, press another, and you'd fall into the familiar cycle of overthinking doubt or frustration. They knew exactly which words to use, which actions would get under your skin, and they used this power to keep you in line. Every reaction you gave was just another confirmation of their control, and for a while you felt like a puppet on a string. But one day you stopped. You didn't fight it. You didn't resist it. Just happened naturally. You stopped reacting. And when that happened, everything changed. Imagine their confusion when they tried to stir up the same drama, the same emotional chaos, and it no longer worked. You didn't flinch. You didn't cry. You didn't chase after them for closure or validation. You stood still, calm and unbothered. It was as if you had become a different person, a person who no longer needed to give them the emotional reactions they craved. This shift was powerful. You didn't just stop reacting. You took back your power piece by piece until you became untouchable. You started paying attention to what really hurt you and why you traced the roots of those reactions to old wounds, patterns from your past that had been triggered by their words or actions. You realized that the emotions they were manipulating weren't even your emotions to begin with. They were old scars, unresolved pain that you had carried around without even knowing it. And then you did something profound. You began healing those parts of yourself. You started to unearth the emotional baggage they had long relied on to control you. The more you healed, the less you had to react. The more you transformed, the less power they had over your emotional state. You didn't just become immune to their manipulation. you became unrecognizable to them. Now, when they tried their old tricks, when they tried to poke at your triggers, you responded with stillness. You didn't get angry. You didn't get sad. You didn't chase them down to explain yourself. You simply observed, and in that observation you saw how small their tactics were, how transparent their efforts were to control you. For them, this was a nightmare. They didn't know what to do with someone who was no longer moved by their games. They couldn't manipulate you anymore because they had no access to your emotional vulnerabilities. They thought they had you figured out, but they never realized that your emotional independence was a power they couldn't touch. You've learned how to control your emotions, and that's made all the difference. Where they once had the ability to provoke a reaction, now you hold the power to decide how you respond. They can throw shade, they can pull away, they can manipulate, but it doesn't faze you. You've learned to stay centered in your peace. And in that peace, you've become a force that cannot be easily moved. It's not that you've become cold or indifferent. It's that you've finally realized that your emotional state is sacred. You've learned that no one gets to dictate how you feel anymore. You're the one who decides how to react, when to speak, and when to stay silent. This level of emotional sovereignty is what drives them insane. They used to thrive on getting a reaction from you, knowing that if they pushed just the right button, they could send you into a spiral of confusion, guilt, or anger. But now they have nothing. They're left talking to a version of you that's no longer available for their games. Your silence isn't a void, it's a declaration. You've reconditioned your emotional responses. What once triggered you, what once sent you into a tailspin of overthinking and self-doubt now rolls off your back like water off a duck's feathers. You've learned to observe, to analyze, and to respond with clarity and intention. And now they can't touch you. They can try their old tricks, but they're not playing with the same person anymore. You've broken free from the chains they tried to bind you with, and in that freedom you've become a version of yourself that they can no longer control. What they thought was weakness, your emotional vulnerability has turned into your greatest strength. And now they're left trying to figure out how to manipulate someone who is emotionally independent, self-aware, and untouchable. It's a game they can no longer play, and they don't even know where to begin. The truth is chosen one. The moment you took back control of your emotions, you took back control of your life. You no longer need anyone's validation to feel whole. You no longer need to explain yourself to people who will never understand. You've risen above the emotional chaos, and in that rise, you've found peace. And that peace, that's what drives them crazy. Section 3. Healing exposed their game. There's something powerful about healing. It's not just about mending broken parts of yourself. It's about awakening to truths you've long buried. Truths you were never meant to see. When you started healing, something began to shift in the way you interacted with the world, and more importantly, with those who once tried to control you. You didn't just get stronger. Chosen one. You got clearer. And in that clarity, you began to see things for what they truly were. Those emotional games they played with you, they weren't about love, concern, or even care. They were tactics, carefully crafted strategies designed to keep you hooked, to keep you in a state of confusion and self-doubt. But healing didn't just bring you peace, it brought you the truth. As you began to understand your own emotional triggers, you started to realize something profound. Their manipulation was built on your pain, your confusion, and your need to explain yourself. The more they pushed your buttons, the more you reacted, the more they validated their power over you. But when you began healing, you stopped giving them the emotional chaos they thrived on. Your healing exposed the game for what it truly was: empty, manipulative, and destructive. What they didn't realize was that by healing, you weren't just fixing broken pieces of yourself. You were breaking down the walls they'd built around you, walls that kept you in a constant state of turmoil, a constant state of reaction. They had convinced you that you needed their approval, their validation, their fake love to feel whole. But healing gave you something they could never offer you: the truth of your own worth. You stopped needing them to feel validated because you recognized that your worth was never tied to their perception of you. And when they saw this transformation, when they saw you walking with that newfound sense of clarity, peace, and emotional independence, that's when their game truly fell apart. They thought they could still keep you in that same cycle, the one where they controlled your emotions, your thoughts, your actions. They tried to pull the same old tricks to create the same emotional chaos, but instead of getting the reaction they were used to, they got nothing. They were left standing in the midst of their own manipulation, completely exposed. This was the moment when you realized just how deeply they had been using you. You were their emotional pawn, their tool, and their audience. But as you healed, you began to see how much of their identity was tied to your pain. They thrived on your confusion, on your emotional turmoil, because it gave them purpose and control. But when you healed, you took that power back. They had no idea how to deal with a version of you that no longer played by their rules. You became the mirror they couldn't face, a reflection of all the ways they had used and manipulated you. And the more you healed, the less power they had. Your growth was their downfall. Healing didn't just set you free. It exposed their game for what it truly was: a strategy that depended on your brokenness. When you healed, they lost their grip on you. They couldn't use your pain as a weapon anymore. They couldn't control you through guilt, shame, or confusion because you no longer felt the need to explain yourself to them. In your silence, your peace, and your emotional independence, you exposed the cracks in their facade. You showed them that the foundation they built their manipulation on, your emotional vulnerability, no longer existed. And now every time they tried to stir up drama or poke at your old wounds, they were met with nothing but stillness. They could see your transformation, but they couldn't touch it. Your healing made them realize that the power they thought they had over you was built on lies, manipulation, and emotional exploitation. What was once their advantage, the ability to control you through your own pain, became their biggest weakness. They had no more pieces to play with. They were left standing there, trying to provoke a reaction that would never come. The more you healed, the more exposed they became. And now their game is over. Healing didn't just make you stronger, it made you unbreakable. It made their lies irrelevant, their tactics obsolete. They thought they were playing you, but you outplayed them. You didn't just break free from their control, you shattered the system they built around you, and in that destruction you found your true self. A self that's untouchable, unbothered, and free. Now, as you continue to walk in your truth, they can only look on in disbelief, because they know deep down that they can never get back into the game they thought they controlled. You've evolved, and in that evolution, they've become powerless. Section 4. Breaking the empathy trap. There was a time when your kindness, your compassion, and your willingness to give others the benefit of the doubt were seen as weaknesses, tools for manipulation. They learned early on how to use your empathy against you. They knew exactly how to play on your heartstrings, how to make you feel guilty, how to twist your desire to help into a trap that kept you giving, compromising, and sacrificing without ever getting anything in return. They took advantage of your generosity, your willingness to understand, your deep capacity to care. They used your need to love others as a weapon, and for a while it worked. But what they didn't realize was that your empathy, your deep understanding of others, wasn't a weakness, it was a gift. And as you grew, you began to realize that not everyone deserved access to that gift. The moment you realized this, everything began to change. You stopped giving just for the sake of giving. You stopped pouring your energy, your time, and your love into people who only took and never gave back. You learned that not everyone deserves the gift of your care. This wasn't about becoming cold or indifferent. It was about discernment. It was about recognizing that your empathy is a precious resource, and you no longer had to waste it on people who were only using you. They had counted on you being their emotional caretaker, always there to lift them up, always ready to pour out your heart. But now they couldn't make you feel guilty for putting yourself first. They couldn't manipulate you into feeling like you owed them your energy or your time. They tried, of course. They played the victim card, the poor me card, tried to guilt you into stepping in and rescuing them. Tried to make you feel like you were the one responsible for their happiness. But you didn't fall for it anymore. You knew better. You saw their manipulation for what it was, emotional blackmail. And instead of responding with the same old pattern of guilt and compromise, you responded with clarity, with boundaries, with self-respect. You recognized that your energy is sacred, and you weren't about to let anyone steal it from you anymore. This shift was so powerful, chosen one, because it wasn't just about changing how you interacted with others, it was about changing how you saw yourself. You stopped seeing your empathy as something to be used up and exhausted for others, and you started seeing it as something that had to be protected, something that needed to be cherished. You learned that love, true love, isn't about constantly giving and sacrificing without ever getting anything back. Love is reciprocal. It's about finding people who can hold your love with respect and gratitude, not those who take from you and leave you feeling drained, confused, and empty. You stopped giving your heart to people who didn't value it, and instead you gave it to yourself. They didn't expect that. They didn't expect you to learn to say no. They didn't expect you to set boundaries and enforce them. They thought they could always count on you to bend over backward to make them happy. But now they were faced with someone who understood their worth, who refused to let anyone use their empathy for their own gain. And that drove them crazy. For so long, they relied on your kindness to control you. They used your guilt, your compassion, and your desire to help as a way to keep you entangled in their emotional web. But now, when they tried to make you feel responsible for their pain, for their messes, for their struggles, they found themselves facing someone who wasn't willing to step in and fix things for them anymore. They could no longer use your empathy to make you feel indebted to them. They couldn't twist your love into a tool for manipulation, and it terrified them. Because once they lost that hold over you, they had nothing left. Their entire strategy crumbled. You broke free from the empathy trap. You stopped seeing your kindness as a weakness and started seeing it as a strength. One that you control, one that you give willingly, but only to those who truly deserve it. You stopped sacrificing your peace for the sake of others. You stopped bending your will to suit their needs, and in doing so, you found a power you never knew you had. What they didn't understand was that your empathy was never the problem. The problem was that they used it to control you, to keep you in a cycle of giving without ever receiving. You've broken that cycle. You've taken back control of your own heart. Now you give from a place of strength, not need. You give when it feels right, when it's welcomed, when it's reciprocated, and when it's not. You walk away, you protect your peace, and you refuse to let anyone guilt you into giving them something they don't deserve. This is the power of emotional independence. Chosen one. It's not about closing your heart off or becoming cold. It's about recognizing that your love, your energy, and your time are precious, and only those who truly respect and value them are worthy of your gifts. And that is a power they can never take from you again. Section 5. No more justifications. There was a time when you felt the constant need to explain yourself. You sought understanding, validation, and approval from others because you didn't want to be misunderstood. You tried so hard to justify your actions, your choices, your feelings. Why? Because somewhere deep down, you believed that if others could see things your way, if they could just understand you, things would finally make sense. You'd finally feel accepted. You'd finally feel validated. But here's the truth, chosen one. You don't need to justify who you are to anyone anymore. You stopped seeking validation from those who don't truly see you. And in doing so, you freed yourself from a cage you didn't even realize you'd been living in. For so long, you lived in a cycle of proving yourself, explaining your every move, and making excuses for why you did what you did. It wasn't that you needed to convince them, it was that you needed to convince yourself that you were worthy. You needed to prove that your actions were justified, that your feelings were valid, that your decisions were rational. And in that constant quest for validation, you became lost. You allowed others to dictate your self-worth. You allowed their judgments, their opinions, and their criticisms to shape your identity. But one day, you realized that you had been seeking approval from the wrong people. You realized that the constant need to explain yourself wasn't a sign of strength. It was a sign of insecurity. You were trying to fit yourself into a box that others had created for you, trying to prove that you were worthy of love, respect, and acceptance, when all along your worth was inherent. You were already whole. You didn't need anyone's permission to exist authentically. And that realization, that's when the game changed. The moment you stopped justifying yourself to others was the moment you started living on your own terms. You began to understand that not everyone is entitled to an explanation. Not everyone deserves to know the reasons behind your decisions or the motivations behind your actions. Some people will never understand. They will never see the depth of your struggles, the complexities of your soul, or the weight of the battles you've fought. And that's okay. You don't need their approval to be who you are. You stopped explaining your decisions, your choices, and your boundaries to people who didn't have the capacity to understand. Instead, you started honoring your own truth. You started living authentically, regardless of how others might perceive you. You realized that you don't owe anyone an explanation for your life, for your growth, or for the person you've become. Your journey is yours alone, and no one has the right to question it. What's even more powerful is that once you stopped justifying yourself, you began to reclaim your power. You became the one in control of your narrative. You stopped letting others define you, and you stopped seeking validation from external sources. You embraced the truth that your worth is not tied to anyone's approval, but your own. You've realized that you don't need anyone to affirm your existence. You simply are, and that is enough. This shift in perspective wasn't easy. It took courage to stop explaining yourself. It took strength to stop chasing after the acceptance of people who would never truly understand you. But you did it. And now you stand firm in your truth, no longer swayed by the opinions of others. This shift also revealed something important. Those who truly care for you don't need constant explanations. They see you for who you are. They respect your boundaries without needing to be told why. They understand that your choices are valid simply because they are yours. These are the people who will walk beside you, not because they need to know your every thought, but because they trust you and respect your journey. On the other hand, those who constantly demand explanations, who make you feel like you owe them a justification for everything you do, those are the people who don't deserve a place in your life anymore. They feed off your insecurity and your need for validation. And now you've cut them off from that power. You've stopped engaging in conversations that drain your energy. You no longer feel obligated to explain yourself to people who will never see your value. The freedom that comes with this shift is immeasurable. You no longer feel like you have to bend over backwards to gain approval. You no longer feel the pressure to explain your every move. You've embraced the power of not explaining, and that chosen one is where your true strength lies. You've learned to stand in your truth without seeking validation. You've learned that your choices are valid because they are yours, not because someone else approves of them. And when you stop justifying your existence, you create space for the real you to shine. The you who doesn't need permission. The you who doesn't need approval. The you who is finally free. This shift has made you unshakable. You no longer apologize for being yourself. You no longer seek validation from people who will never understand your journey. You've reached a place of emotional sovereignty where you trust yourself, trust your decisions, and trust your worth. And that's a place of power no one can take away from you. You stopped explaining, and that was the moment you truly became who you were always meant to be. Section 6. Self-respect over manipulation. There was a time when you felt the need to constantly give, to compromise your values, your needs, and even your boundaries for the sake of others. You allowed yourself to be molded, shaped, and manipulated by those around you, always putting others first, always trying to please, always sacrificing your own peace for their comfort. It was a pattern, a cycle that was so ingrained in you that you didn't even realize how deeply you were compromising your own sense of self. But eventually, something inside you shifted. You started to realize that the constant compromising wasn't making you stronger. It was wearing you down. You started to see that giving up your peace to make others happy wasn't an act of love. It was an act of self-neglect. You began to see that you were losing yourself in the process. That's when you started to set boundaries. You started saying no when you needed to. You stopped apologizing for your needs, for your limits, and for your right to have space, time, and peace. You recognized that self-respect was not about controlling others. It was about controlling your own life, your energy, and your peace. You stopped letting people walk all over you, and you started honoring your worth. Self-respect became the foundation of your transformation. This shift didn't happen overnight. It wasn't easy. It took courage to look at the ways you'd been allowing yourself to be manipulated, and to admit that you had been part of the problem. You had allowed others to take advantage of your kindness, your time, and your emotional energy. You had allowed people to invade your boundaries because you were too afraid of disappointing them, too afraid of conflict. But when you started to see your worth, you realized that you couldn't keep sacrificing yourself for people who wouldn't even acknowledge your value. The first time you set a boundary, it felt uncomfortable. It felt unnatural. You worried that you were being too harsh or too selfish. But the more you did it, the more you realized that boundaries weren't a sign of weakness. They were a sign of strength. You were no longer going to allow others to treat you as if you didn't matter. You were no longer going to compromise your peace for the sake of maintaining someone else's comfort. And when you started to set those boundaries, you began to see the real shift. The people who once manipulated you started reacting in ways that made it clear they had never respected your boundaries in the first place. They tried to guilt trip you, make you feel selfish, or convince you that you owed them something. They tried to use their emotional needs to pull you back into the cycle of manipulation. But this time, you didn't fall for it. You held firm. You stood your ground. And as you did, something amazing happened. You started to feel stronger. You started to feel worthy. You began to realize that your time, your energy, and your emotional well-being were precious. You weren't just a vessel to be drained by others. You were someone worthy of respect, someone who deserved to live in peace without constantly being at the mercy of others' demands. Self-respect wasn't just about setting boundaries with others. It was about setting them with yourself. You stopped allowing your inner dialogue to be filled with self-doubt. You stopped the negative self-talk that once had you second-guessing every decision. You began to trust yourself. You started honoring your own needs and desires without guilt or shame. This was true freedom. The freedom to live life on your terms, to make decisions that align with your values, and to honor your own heart and soul. You learned that you didn't have to seek external validation or approval to feel complete. Your worth was inherent. It didn't depend on how others saw you. It didn't depend on how much you gave to others. It depended on how much you respected yourself. The beauty of self-respect is that it creates boundaries that protect your peace, your mental health, and your emotional well-being. It teaches you to prioritize yourself without guilt, to fill your own cup before you pour into others. And when you started doing that, you noticed something incredible. The people who truly cared for you respected your boundaries. They didn't take offense to your no, they respected it. They saw you as someone who knew their worth, and they treated you accordingly. But the manipulators, the ones who thrived on getting their needs met at the expense of your peace, they couldn't handle it. They didn't know how to engage with someone who was no longer available for their games. They didn't know how to deal with someone who had finally started respecting themselves. And that chosen one is where you gained the ultimate power. You became untouchable, not because you fought harder, but because you no longer needed to fight at all. Your boundaries became your shield, and your self-respect became your weapon. No longer were you swayed by emotional manipulation, guilt, or pressure. You knew your worth, and you refused to let anyone treat you as less than that. Self-respect wasn't just about protecting your peace. It was about reclaiming your energy. It was about choosing to live your life on your terms, regardless of who tried to sway you. And the beauty of that, it left those who once manipulated you powerless. They had no access to your energy anymore. They couldn't pull on your heartstrings, guilt-trip you, or manipulate you into compromising your peace. You were no longer their emotional puppet. You were the one in control. Self-respect gave you the strength to walk away from situations, relationships, and environments that no longer served you. It gave you the courage to prioritize your own happiness, peace, and well-being. And when you began living from this place of self-respect, you realized just how powerful you had become. No one can manipulate someone who has learned to respect themselves and now chosen one. You've mastered that art. You've stepped into your true power. Section 7. Mastering Peace. For so long you were caught in a whirlwind of chaos. You reacted to every emotional storm that came your way, every piece of drama that unfolded in your life. You were always in fight-or-flight mode, trying to keep the peace, trying to keep everything under control, trying to make sense of it all. But peace, true peace, it always felt just out of reach. They counted on your chaos. They thrived on the emotional upheaval you carried, the uncertainty, the anxiety, the rush of tension in your every response. It kept them in control. They knew that if they pushed hard enough, you would bend, you would break, and you would fall right into their trap. They knew how to stir the pot, how to create confusion, how to keep you on edge, because as long as you were reacting, as long as you were caught up in their games, they knew they could control you. But something changed, chosen one. You didn't just stop reacting. You stopped letting the chaos control you. You made a decision. You chose peace. It wasn't a decision made lightly. It wasn't a quick fix or a simple path. It was a commitment to no longer let external circumstances, external people, or external drama dictate how you felt. You made a conscious choice to no longer engage in the noise, to no longer get caught in the emotional maelstrom that others created. Instead, you decided to cultivate an inner peace that couldn't be shaken. And once you did, everything shifted. Peace became your superpower. When the world around you tried to throw its chaos your way, you didn't respond with anger, frustration, or worry. You responded with calm. You didn't let their drama pull you in. You didn't let their manipulations, their criticisms, or their games rattle your sense of self. You realized that peace wasn't just about external calm. It was about internal stability. It was about creating a foundation within yourself that nothing and no one could shake. At first it felt foreign. It felt unnatural. The urge to react was still there, to engage, to explain, to fix things. But over time, you started to see how much more powerful it was to simply stay still, to sit in silence, to observe. You began to realize that when you stopped reacting, when you stopped engaging in the chaos, you took away their power. The more you stayed calm, the more they were forced to confront the fact that they couldn't manipulate you. They couldn't bait you into an emotional response. They couldn't control you with drama anymore. It wasn't that you were passive. Far from it. You were strategic. You understood that true strength isn't about reacting. It's about responding. And sometimes the best response is no response at all. In your peace, you became an enigma to those around you. You no longer played by their rules, and that drove them mad. They were used to getting a reaction, used to seeing you caught up in their emotional roller coaster. But now when they tried to provoke you, when they tried to pull you into their drama, they found that it didn't work. They threw tantrums, created conflict, and tried to drag you into the mess. But all you did was stand still in your peace. And that was more powerful than any reaction could ever be. Mastering peace didn't just change the way you interacted with the world. It changed the way you interacted with yourself. You stopped feeding into the anxiety, the self-doubt, the worry that used to cloud your mind. You learned how to create a space of stillness within yourself, no matter what was happening around you, and that space of stillness became your anchor. When they tried to trigger your old wounds, your old insecurities, you stood firm. When they tried to make you doubt yourself, you stood firm. When they threw their emotional chaos your way, you stayed rooted in your own peace. And in that peace, you discovered a strength that was more powerful than anything they could throw at you. You didn't need to fight back. You didn't need to raise your voice or engage in conflict. You simply needed to be. And that was the most powerful weapon you could wield. Because when you stood in your peace, it became impossible for anyone to manipulate you, impossible for anyone to control you. And now, as you continue to walk in that peace, you've realized something incredible. Your peace is untouchable. No one, no situation, no manipulation can shake you because you've learned to control the one thing you can yourself. You've learned that the greatest strength lies in stillness. Peace isn't just about being calm in the absence of conflict. It's about maintaining your center in the midst of chaos. It's about knowing who you are, what you stand for, and not letting anything or anyone take that away from you. This peace is your foundation, and nothing can disrupt it. The world around you can change. People can try to drag you into their drama, but you are unmoved. You've mastered peace, chosen one, and that's a power they can never take from you. In this peace, you've found your power. In this peace, you've found your freedom, and now you're untouchable. You've learned that the best way to defeat the chaos is to simply not engage with it, to let it come, let it go, and stay rooted in your own truth. This is the power of peace, and now it's your greatest strength. Section 8. The freedom of non-reaction. For so long, you were trained to react. React to their words. React to their actions. React to their emotional manipulations. You believed that by reacting, you could somehow regain control, somehow fix things, somehow protect yourself. Every time they poked, you flinched. Every time they stirred the pot, you jumped in to try to resolve it. You were always caught in the cycle of reacting, living in a constant state of emotional alertness, never truly at peace. But what if I told you that the moment you stopped reacting was the moment you gained true power? What if the key to your freedom wasn't in fighting, explaining, or justifying yourself, but in choosing not to react? This was the breakthrough moment for you. You began to realize that every time you reacted, you were feeding into their game. You were allowing them to dictate your emotions, to pull you into their chaos. You were allowing them to control the narrative. And once you understood this, you made a conscious decision. No more. You stopped engaging in their emotional traps. You stopped reacting to their bait. You stopped giving them the satisfaction of seeing you twisted up in their manipulations. It wasn't an easy decision. It took a level of self-awareness that most people never achieve. But once you decided to stop reacting, you noticed something profound. You felt lighter, freer, more in control of yourself. The emotional chaos that once dominated your life began to fade into the background. And the best part, the moment you stopped reacting, they lost their power over you. You didn't need to shout, argue, or explain. You didn't need to defend yourself, justify your actions, or convince anyone of your worth. You simply let their words fall away. You no longer allowed their emotional outbursts, their manipulations, or their criticisms to affect you. You became like water fluid, calm and unaffected. They tried to provoke you, tried to drag you back into their world of drama, but every attempt bounced off you, leaving them confused and powerless. What they didn't understand was that you weren't passive. You weren't avoiding conflict or being weak. You were making a powerful choice to stay grounded in your peace, no matter what storm they tried to create around you. And that is where your strength lies. Chosen one. The ability to remain unmoved, unshaken, and unbothered in the face of chaos is the ultimate act of sovereignty. In this space, you realized that your reaction used to be a reflex, a knee-jerk response to emotional triggers. But now you've trained yourself to pause before you respond. You've given yourself the gift of silence, and in that silence, you've found your power. It's a quiet strength that no one can take from you. When you stop reacting, you stop giving them control over your emotions. You become the observer instead of the participant in their drama. You no longer need to fight every battle. You no longer need to prove yourself. You simply choose your peace over their chaos. And here's the thing. When you stop reacting, you start acting on your terms. No longer a slave to emotional manipulation. You begin to move with intention, with purpose, with clarity. You don't let life push you around anymore. You've learned to stay in control of your energy, your emotions, and your actions. This is a game changer. They were so used to seeing you react, whether it was with anger, frustration, sadness, or confusion. They relied on your reactions to keep you in line, to keep you in the cycle. But now that you've stopped reacting, they've lost their grip on you. They don't know what to do with someone who doesn't play by their rules, someone who doesn't give them the emotional responses they crave. And this shift, this refusal to react, is what makes you untouchable. When you don't react, you take away their power. Their tricks no longer work. Their bait doesn't catch you. They're left with nothing but their own tactics, which now that you're not reacting are powerless. Your silence, your calm, your non-reaction is more powerful than any argument you could have had. You've learned that some battles aren't worth fighting. Some people aren't worth engaging with. And the chosen one is the freedom you've unlocked. You're not running from conflict. You're stepping away from the chaos and choosing peace. You're not avoiding problems. You're letting them resolve themselves without your involvement. You've realized that you are the one who decides how you engage with the world, and you choose to live from a place of centered calm, no matter how others try to stir the pot. And this non-reaction, this freedom from emotional manipulation is what makes you unshakable. You don't need to respond to every provocation. You don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to fight for your place. You are exactly where you need to be, and no one can take that from you. In the end, you've discovered that the greatest power you can possess is the power of peace. The power to remain unbothered, unshaken, and unaffected by the storms around you. And in that power, you are untouchable. You are free. You have mastered the art of non-reaction, and with it, you have unlocked the door to your true strength. And there you have it, chosen one. You've walked through the journey of self-discovery, healing, and empowerment. And now you stand in a place where the old games no longer work. The manipulations, the emotional chaos, the constant need for validation, those things no longer have any hold over you. You've stepped into your true power, and nothing can take that from you. As you continue to walk this path, remember that you are the one in control of your peace. You are the one who decides where your energy goes, who gets access to your heart, and who gets to share in your journey. You've learned to protect your boundaries, honor your worth, and remain steadfast in your truth. And in that, you've found a strength that's unshakable. You no longer have to react to the world around you. You've learned to stand firm in your peace, to let go of what no longer serves you, and to move through life with intention. You don't need to prove yourself. You don't need to explain your choices. You are enough just as you are, and you know that now more than ever. The manipulations, the mind games, they're over. The only game that matters now is the one you're playing, and you're winning. You've evolved, you've grown, and now you're living on your own terms. And no one, not their words, not their actions, not their opinions, can take that away from you. So take a moment to bask in that truth. You are unshakable. You are untouchable. You are free. If this message resonated with you, chosen one, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment below to let me know how you've reclaimed your power. I want to hear from you. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, and turn on that notification bell. This journey is just beginning, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you for watching, and remember, your peace is your power. You are the master of your own life, and you've already won. Keep standing in your truth, chosen one.